Do you think you already know everything there is to know about potatoes? Think again. In the 1950s, potatoes were more than a side dish. They were a quiet backbone of the American kitchen, shaped by thrift, patience, and hard earned knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Long before cooking shortcuts, digital timers, and plastic packaging, grandmothers relied on instinct, observation, and simple habits that turned the most ordinary ingredient into something reliable, filling, and deeply comforting. These were not tricks learned from cookbooks. They were learned by watching hands at work, by standing close to the stove, by peeling and waiting and listening. Every potato carried a lesson about waste, timing, care, and family. What looks simple now was once essential, and what feels forgotten today once fed entire households week after week. This is a look back at those small, almost invisible potato hacks that defined everyday life in the 1950s. The kind of knowledge that never needed instructions because it was already understood. 1. 1. The paper bag potato. In a quiet 1950s kitchen, before expiration dates and airtight containers ruled the shelves, a simple brown paper bag often sat folded beneath the counter, heavy with potatoes and heavier with know-how. Did not look like much. No labels, no instructions, just a bag reused from the grocery store, creased at the corners, trusted without question. In the 1950s, most families understood something modern kitchens have nearly forgotten. Potatoes hated light, moisture, and cold. Refrigerators were becoming common, but experienced home cooks knew better. Cold air turned potato starch into sugar, giving fried potatoes an odd sweetness and causing them to burn too quickly. Plastic bags trapped moisture and encouraged rot. So grandmothers reached for paper. The brown paper bag breathed just enough. It absorbed excess moisture, blocked light, and kept air circulating. Folded loosely at the top, it created the perfect low-tech storage system. This mattered because potatoes were not a side dish. They were survival food dressed up as comfort. Fried for breakfast, mashed for supper, roasted on Sundays, and stretched into soups when money was tight. A bad sack of potatoes meant wasted meals and wasted money, something no 1950s household could afford. The paper bag hack kept potatoes usable for weeks, sometimes longer, without a single gadget involved. It was knowledge passed quietly, learned by watching, not reading. There was also an unspoken ritual to it. Potatoes were checked by hand. A grandmother would reach into the bag, feel for softness, snap off a small sprout without worry, and return the rest to the dark. Children learned that food was alive, changing, something you cared for, rather than discarded at the first imperfection. The bag itself might be reused several times until it softened and tore, then replaced with another just like it. The emotional twist comes when you realize how much trust lived in that habit. No printed rules, no fear, just experience. Today, potatoes are often tossed the moment they sprout or wrinkle slightly. In the 1950s, that would have seemed wasteful, even disrespectful. The paper bag was not just storage, it was a signal of patience and thrift, of confidence earned through years of feeding a family. And as those potatoes sat quietly in the dark, waiting for their turn at the table, they carried with them a larger lesson. Sometimes the simplest solution, learned once and practiced for a lifetime, works better than anything new. 2. Saltwater soak before frying. Long before cooking shows explained chemistry, a bowl of cloudy salt water on the counter told you that fried potatoes were coming. In the 1950s, this step was so common it barely needed explanation. Sliced potatoes went straight into cold water, a pinch of salt sprinkled in by feel, not measurement. They rested there quietly while the stove warmed and the skillet waited. The habit came from experience, not recipes. Grandmothers knew that fresh-cut potatoes carried excess surface starch. If dropped straight into hot fat, they stuck together, browned unevenly, or turned limp instead of crisp. The saltwater soak pulled that starch away. It also seasoned the potatoes from the inside out, something surface salting could never quite do. After soaking, the slices were drained and patted dry with a tea towel that had already seen decades of use. This mattered because fried potatoes were everyday food. Breakfast hash, supper side home fries, skillet dinners stretched to feed extra mouths. Restaurants had deep fryers and steady heat. Homes had cast iron pans and patience. The saltwater soak leveled the playing field. It made humble potatoes fry up golden, crisp at the edges, soft in the middle. It was how home cooking quietly competed with the diner down the road. There was also discipline in the process. You could not rush it. The potatoes needed time, and so did the cook. Children were often warned not to touch the bowl, not to sneak a raw slice. Cooking was not just about heat, it was about preparation, restraint, and knowing when to wait. The emotional twist is how invisible this knowledge became. Today, many people chase crispiness with gadgets, coatings, or frozen shortcuts, unaware that one bowl of salted water once did the job perfectly. The skill was so ordinary it was never written down, yet powerful enough to define a generation's idea of comfort food. And as the potatoes finally hit the hot pan, sizzling just right, that quiet bowl on the counter had already done its work, preparing the way for the next small kitchen secret that every 1950s grandmother knew by heart. 3. The sprout check test. In the 1950s, a sprouting potato did not cause panic, it caused inspection. A grandmother would lift it from the bag, turn it slowly in her hand, and decide its fate without hesitation. No charts, no warnings on a screen, just touch, smell, and memory. Potatoes sprouted often in warm kitchens, especially as winter turned to spring. Back then, families understood that food did not stay perfect forever. What mattered was knowing the difference between usable and unsafe. A few short, firm sprouts were snapped off with a thumbnail. If the potato was still solid and smelled clean, it went straight back into rotation. Softness, deep wrinkles, or a bitter smell told a different story. That potato was done. This mattered because throwing food away was a last resort. Many 1950s homemakers had lived through the Great Depression or wartime rationing. They carried those lessons forward. Potatoes were affordable, but they were still valuable. Stretching them meant stretching the household budget. The sprout check test prevented waste while keeping families safe, long before food safety labels became common. There was also confidence in this habit. Grandmothers trusted their senses more than rules. Children watched closely as decisions were made in seconds. They learned that cooking was not fear-based. It was informed, calm, and grounded in experience. A sprouting potato was not an enemy. It was a question to be answered. The emotional twist comes when you compare that certainty to today's anxiety around food. Many modern kitchens toss produce at the first sign of imperfection. The old method reminds us that knowledge once lived in people, not packaging. A potato's future was decided by human judgment, not a printed date. As the acceptable potatoes returned to the bag and the rejected one went to the compost or the chickens, the lesson lingered. Understanding food meant respecting it. And with that quiet decision made, the kitchen moved one step closer to the next potato wisdom, passed down without ever being written. 4. Bacon grease potato roasts. In a 1950s kitchen, bacon grease was never poured down the sink. It was poured into a tin, cooled, and saved with care. That tin often sat near the stove, ready for its next purpose, and one of its most trusted uses was roasting potatoes. The habit came from thrift and flavor working hand in hand. Bacon was expensive enough to respect, and its rendered fat carried salt, smoke, and richness that no store-bought oil could match. When potatoes were sliced or cubed for roasting, a spoonful of saved bacon grease transformed them. The fat coated each piece evenly, seeping into the surface as it cooked, crisping the edges while keeping the inside tender. This mattered because meat was not always the centerpiece of the meal. Potatoes roasted in bacon grease could carry a plate on their own. They made supper feel hearty even when portions were small. For families watching every dollar, this was flavor multiplied, not wasted. One breakfast's bacon flavored several future meals, stretching both taste and budget. There was comfort in the ritual, the sound of potatoes hitting hot grease, the familiar smell filling the house, the way children recognized supper before it was announced. These potatoes did not need seasoning beyond what the fat already provided. The flavor came layered with memory, built from meals before it. The emotional twist is realizing how intentional this practice was. Today, rendered fat is often seen as something to avoid. In the 1950s, it was seen as precious. Saving bacon grease was an act of respect for the animal, the money spent, and the family being fed. It connected meals across days, tying breakfast to supper without waste. As the roasting pan slid into the oven, heavy and promising, the potatoes carried more than heat. They carried the idea that nothing good should be thrown away. And from that lesson of thrift and flavor, another potato secret was always waiting just around the corner. 5. The cold water peel trick. When boiled potatoes were ready in a 1950s kitchen, the pot did not go straight to the sink to be drained and forgotten. Instead, it was lifted carefully and tipped into cold water, sometimes straight from the tap, sometimes from a waiting basin. What followed looked like magic to anyone seeing it for the first time. The trick was simple and learned early. Hot potatoes plunged into cold water caused their skins to loosen instantly. A gentle rub with the fingers or a small paring knife was enough to slide the peel away in large pieces. No struggling, no wasted flesh. The potato underneath stayed smooth and whole, ready for mashing, slicing, or salad. This mattered because peeling potatoes was time-consuming work, often done in large quantities. Holiday meals, church suppers, and Sunday dinners demanded dozens of potatoes at once. The cold water peel trick saved hands, time, and patience. It also reduced waste, preserving every bit of edible potato at a time when nothing was meant to be lost. There was rhythm to the process. Steam rising, cold water splashing, skins slipping free and collecting at the surface. Children were sometimes allowed to help, delighted by how easily the peels came off. Cooking was not hidden work. It was shared, observed, and passed along through small demonstrations like this. The emotional twist lies in how this knowledge faded. Many people today struggle with peeling, unaware that one temperature change could solve the problem. The old method feels almost forgotten, even though it required no tools, no purchases, only understanding. As the peeled potatoes rested, warm and waiting, they were already halfway to becoming something comforting. And in that smooth, skinless pile sat the quiet promise of the next lesson, another small kitchen wisdom learned by watching and never written down. 6. Mashed potatoes without milk. In many 1950s kitchens, mashed potatoes were made long before milk was guaranteed. The habit came from earlier decades when shortages and rationing forced cooks to improvise. Even after shelves filled again, the knowledge stayed. When milk was scarce or being saved for children, grandmothers reached for what they had. A bit of potato cooking water, rich with starch, was stirred back into the mash. Sometimes a spoon of butter or saved bacon grease followed. The result was not thin or sad. It was creamy, smooth, and deeply comforting, built on technique rather than abundance. This mattered because mashed potatoes were a staple. They showed up on weeknights, holidays, and everything in between. Families could not afford to skip them just because one ingredient was missing. Knowing how to make them work under any circumstance was essential. The potato water provided body while fat added richness. Together, they created balance without waste. There was also pride in this method. Making good food from very little was considered a skill. Children learned that cooking was not about perfect ingredients. It was about understanding how food behaved and how to coax the best from it. No one at the table needed to know milk was absent. The bowl came out full, warm, and satisfying. The emotional twist comes when you realize how resilience shaped taste. Some people who grew up on these potatoes preferred them this way for life. The flavor was familiar, tied to survival and care, not deprivation. What began as necessity became tradition. As the masher lifted and fell, turning simple potatoes into something comforting, the kitchen moved forward once again. And with the bowl set at the center of the table, another quiet potato lesson waited to be remembered. 7. The onion in the bin. Secret. In a 1950s pantry, potatoes were rarely stored alone. Tucked beside them, sometimes intentionally, sometimes by habit, sat a whole onion or two. It looked accidental, but it wasn't. Grandmothers believed onions helped keep potatoes from spoiling too quickly, and they treated that belief as settled fact. The practice came from observation rather than science lessons. Onions were known to give off strong smells and natural compounds, and many home cooks noticed that potatoes stored nearby seemed to last a little longer. Whether it was the dryness of the onion or the way it discouraged moisture buildup, the result mattered more than the explanation. Potatoes stayed firmer. Rot appeared less often. This mattered because storage space was limited. Pantries were small, basements shared with laundry, and root cellars were not guaranteed. Making the most of shared space required small tricks like this. If one onion could help protect a sack of potatoes, it earned its place without question. There was also a sense of quiet control in this habit. Grandmothers adjusted their storage without fuss. If potatoes started turning too fast, an onion was added. If things improved, the method was confirmed. No instructions were written. The lesson lived in repetition. The emotional twist is how modern advice often contradicts these old habits. Yet many people swear they remember potatoes lasting longer this way. It raises a deeper truth. Not all kitchen knowledge was exact science. Some of it was pattern, intuition, and trust built over years of feeding people. As the onion sat quietly beside the potatoes, doing its unseen work, the kitchen carried on. And with storage settled, attention turned once again to cooking, where another potato trick waited its turn. 8. Potato water for gravy. After boiling potatoes in a 1950s kitchen, the cloudy water left behind was never rushed down the drain. A grandmother would pause, lift the lid, and take one more look before deciding what to do. More often than not, that water was saved. The reason was simple and learned through repetition. Potato water was full of starch, and starch meant thickness. When added to gravy, soups, or sauces, it created body without the need for flour or cream. A ladle of that water could turn thin pan drippings into something rich and spoon coating, all without extra cost. This mattered because gravy was more than decoration. It stretched meals. A small portion of meat felt larger when paired with generous gravy over potatoes or bread. During a time when nothing was meant to feel skimpy, potato water helped create abundance from leftovers. It was a quiet kitchen economy at work. There was also a sense of continuity in this practice. The potato contributed twice to the meal, first as food, then as foundation. Children watching learned that cooking was not a series of separate steps. It was one flowing process where nothing useful was wasted. The emotional twist comes when you realize how rare this thinking feels today. Modern cooking often separates steps, discarding what seems finished. The old way saw potential in everything. Cloudy water was not trash, it was opportunity. As the saved potato water simmered gently with pan drippings thickening into gravy, it carried forward the same lesson taught again and again in 1950s kitchens. Pay attention. Use what you have. And with that, the path cleared for yet another potato trick passed down without a recipe card. 9. Leftover mashed potato pancakes. In a 1950s home, leftover mashed potatoes were never a problem. They were a plan. Cold from the icebox and stiff from resting overnight, they were already halfway to becoming something new by morning. A grandmother would scoop the mash into a bowl, add a little flour if needed, maybe an egg if one was available, and shape the mixture by hand. The patties went straight, into a hot skillet, often greased with saved bacon fat. As they cooked, the outside turned golden and crisp, while the inside stayed soft and comforting. This mattered because breakfast needed to be filling and fast. School mornings and workdays did not allow for waste or indecision. Turning leftovers into a fresh meal meant saving both time and money. It also taught children that yesterday's food was not inferior. It was simply unfinished. There was joy in the transformation. The smell was different from mashed potatoes, richer and more savory. The texture surprised anyone expecting reheated leftovers. Served with a fried egg or a drizzle of syrup, these pancakes felt intentional, not improvised. The emotional twist lies in how this habit reframed scarcity. What could have felt like repetition became creativity. Families did not feel deprived, they felt resourceful. The same potatoes that anchored supper became the highlight of breakfast. As the pancakes sizzled and flipped, the kitchen once again proved that good food did not depend on novelty. It depended on care. And with that lesson absorbed, another quiet potato wisdom waited just ahead. 10. The root cellar cure. Before potatoes ever reached the kitchen in the 1950s, many had already been prepared for long life. This was known simply as curing, and it often happened in basements, sheds, or makeshift root cellars attached to the house. Freshly harvested potatoes were not cooked right away. They were laid out in a cool, dark, well-ventilated space for days or even weeks. During this time, their skins thickened and small surface wounds healed. Grandmothers understood that skipping this step meant potatoes that spoiled faster and bruised easily. Curing made them tougher, more resilient, and better suited for months of storage. This mattered because winter meals depended on it. Once the ground froze, fresh produce became limited. A properly cured supply of potatoes could carry a family through cold months when gardens were bare. This was food security practiced quietly at home, not talked about but deeply relied upon. There was patience built into the process. You could not rush curing. It required restraint, trust, and planning ahead. Children learned that food had seasons and that good meals in January often depended on work done back in autumn. The emotional twist is realizing how rare this relationship with time has become. Today, food is expected to be ready immediately. In the 1950s, some of the best meals started weeks earlier in a dark, cool space where nothing seemed to be happening at all. As those cured potatoes finally made their way upstairs to the kitchen, they carried the weight of preparation and foresight. And with them came the next lesson, one that shaped how potatoes behaved once the pot hit the stove. Conclusion. So the next time you peel a potato, boil a pot of water, or toss a sprout without a second thought, pause for a moment. Those quiet habits once meant the difference between waste and comfort, between getting by and feeling fed. The grandmothers of the 1950s did not cook with trends or tools. They cooked with memory, patience, and respect for what they had. Potatoes taught them how to stretch meals, how to slow down, and how to turn ordinary moments into shared rituals. These hacks were not about perfection. They were about care. And while the kitchens have changed, the lessons still hold, because sometimes the simplest foods carry the deepest wisdom, waiting to be remembered, one potato at a time.